Open your eyes. From a real corpse used on set to a line that was completely improvised and became the most quoted moment in cinema history, James Cameron's Titanic isn't just a love story. It's a time capsule of obsessive detail, hidden Easter eggs, and production secrets that took 27 years for people to notice. Some of these details cost millions of dollars. Others were pure accidents that made the final cut. And a few were hiding in plain sight the entire time, just waiting for someone to pause at exactly the right frame. These are 21 hidden details you completely missed in Titanic. If this is the kind of content you love, hit subscribe. I break down cinema secrets every single week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Number 21. The clock in the opening scene shows the exact time the ship sank. When Old Rose begins telling her story to Brock Lovett and his crew in that cramped research vessel, there's a clock visible on the wall behind her. If you look closely, the time reads 2:20 a.m. Most people watching are focused on Gloria Stewart's performance or the grainy shipwreck footage playing on the monitors, but Cameron placed that clock there deliberately. The RMS Titanic sank at exactly 2:20 in the morning on April 15, 1912. That single prop is Cameron's way of telling you from frame one that every detail in this film has been researched, verified, and placed with surgical precision. It's the kind of touch most viewers breeze right past. But once you know it's there, you can't unsee the intention behind every frame. Cameron didn't make a romance that happened to be set on the Titanic. He made a historical reconstruction that happens to contain one of cinema's greatest love stories. Number 20. The movie's runtime matches the actual sinking in real time. Titanic has a runtime of 2 hours and 40 minutes. From the moment the ship strikes the iceberg to the moment it fully disappears beneath the ocean surface in the film, approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes pass in real time. This wasn't an accident. Cameron structured the film's second half to mirror the catastrophe as it actually unfolded, minute by agonizing minute, so audiences would feel the same mounting dread that passengers experienced. Survivors described those hours as simultaneously endless and impossibly fast, time stretching and compressing as panic set in. Cameron wanted you to live through that. The clock wasn't just ticking on screen. It was ticking in the theater. That sense of inevitable doom you felt watching the ship break apart, knowing you still had an hour left in your seat, that was by design. Cameron weaponized runtime itself to make you feel trapped alongside 1,500 people who knew they were about to die. Number 19. Jack's sketch of Rose was actually drawn by James Cameron. The famous drawing of Rose wearing nothing but the heart of the ocean, reclining on that couch with her hair pinned up and her eyes daring Jack to capture her exactly as she is, wasn't created by Leonardo DiCaprio. It was drawn by Cameron himself. If you watch the scene closely and focus on the hands moving across the paper rather than the romantic tension in the room, you'll notice the hands don't match DiCaprio's. They're rougher, older, more controlled. They're Cameron's. He's left-handed, and he spent hours before filming practicing that exact sketch over and over, trying dozens of variations until he got the line quality, the shading, and the pose exactly right. He wanted it to look raw and immediate, like something a talented young artist would produce in the moment, but also technically skilled enough to justify Rose's reaction. That drawing later sold at auction for $16,000 and remains one of the most iconic props in film history. Every single line on that paper came from the same man who engineered every frame of the movie around it. Number 18. Gloria Stewart, who played Old Rose, was the only cast member actually alive when the Titanic sank. Stewart was born in 1910, 2 years before the disaster. While she wasn't old enough to remember the news when it broke, she lived through the era when Titanic was still a fresh wound in public consciousness, when survivors were still giving interviews and the world was still processing the scale of the loss. Cameron cast her specifically because he wanted that generational authenticity. He needed someone who could embody the weight of carrying a secret for 84 years. Stewart brought something to the role that no acting technique could replicate. Her performance carries the knowledge of an entire century. She was a living bridge between the world of 1912 and 1997, and her presence gave the entire production a haunting sense of historical legitimacy. When she speaks in the film, You're not just hearing an actress deliver lines. You're hearing someone who existed in the same world as the real passengers, even if only for a brief and distant overlap. Number 17. The film's budget exceeded the actual cost of building the Titanic. Adjusting for inflation, the RMS Titanic cost approximately $7.5 million to construct in 1912. Cameron's film cost over $200 million to produce, making it the most expensive movie ever made at the time. Studio executives at Fox were convinced it would be a financial catastrophe. They watched the budget spiral out of control, watched Cameron demand take after take in freezing water, watched him build full-scale sets that would be used for mere minutes of screen time and then destroyed forever. They wanted to fire him midway through production. There were serious conversations about shutting the whole thing down and writing off the loss entirely. But Cameron kept pushing, kept spending, kept insisting that anything less than perfection would dishonor the 1,500 people who died. The studio thought he was losing his mind. Then the film opened. It grossed over $2.2 billion worldwide, held the title of highest-grossing film of all time for 12 years, and won 11 Academy Awards. Cameron vindicated every seemingly insane decision, and then 12 years later, he beat his own record with Avatar. The man who almost got fired for overspending became the only director in history to make 2 of the 3 highest-grossing films ever made. Number 16. The band really did play as the ship sank, and their final song is historically accurate. In the film, as passengers scramble for lifeboats and officers fire warning shots and the deck tilts at impossible angles, the ship's band continues playing. Their final song is Nearer, My God, to Thee, a hymn associated with death and last moments, a song you sing when you know the end is coming. This isn't Hollywood sentimentality. Survivor accounts confirm that the band, led by Wallace Hartley, kept playing to calm passengers even as the ship went down. All 8 musicians perished. Hartley's body was later recovered from the North Atlantic with his violin case still strapped to his chest, still protecting the instrument he played until the water took him. Cameron didn't sentimentalize this moment. He didn't add dramatic close-ups or emotional swells. He presented it exactly as it happened, a quiet act of grace and professionalism in the middle of unimaginable chaos. Those men chose to die doing their jobs, giving people something beautiful to hold on to in their final moments. Cameron honored that choice by refusing to turn it into melodrama. Number 15. The elderly couple lying in bed as water floods their cabin were based on real Titanic passengers. Isidore and Ida Strauss, co-owners of Macy's department store, were traveling first class aboard the Titanic. When the ship began sinking, Isidore was offered a lifeboat spot because of his age and prominence. He refused, saying he wouldn't board before younger men and women. Ida was offered a seat. She refused to leave without her husband. Witnesses reported seeing them return to their cabin, lie down together fully clothed, and hold each other as the water rose. They chose to die together rather than live apart. Cameron recreated this moment with heartbreaking accuracy. That brief scene, maybe 5 seconds of screen time, no dialogue, just 2 people holding hands as the world ends, honors a love story that deserves to be remembered just as much as Jack and Rose. It's a reminder that Titanic isn't just a fictional romance. It's built on top of 1,500 real deaths, and some of those deaths were acts of love as powerful as anything Cameron ever wrote. Number 14. There's a deleted scene that explains why Jack was in Europe. In the final cut, Jack mentions winning his ticket in a poker game in Southampton, but we never learn what he was doing in Europe or how a penniless American artist ended up gambling for transatlantic passage. A deleted scene reveals that Jack had been living in Paris for months, working as a street artist on the left bank, sketching tourists for a few francs, sleeping in cheap boarding houses, and living exactly the bohemian lifestyle he describes to Rose at dinner. The scene shows him in a Parisian cafe, laughing with other artists, completely comfortable with having no money and no plan. Cameron cut it because it slowed the opening's pacing, but it adds vital context to Jack's character. It explains his ease with poverty, his artist's eye for beauty, his belief that life is about the moments you collect rather than the things you own. Without that scene, Jack can feel like a fantasy. With it, He feels like someone who genuinely existed in 1912, a young man fully shaped by the world he moved through. Number 13. The water in the sinking scenes was heated, but only for actors with speaking roles. Background extras, the hundreds of people scrambling across tilting decks and floating in the ocean, were submerged in freezing water pulled directly from the Pacific, sometimes for hours at a time. The temperature hovered around 50 degrees. Several extras developed hypothermia and had to be pulled from the water and treated by on-set medics. One extra threatened to sue the production, claiming the conditions were inhumane. Cameron later admitted in interviews that this was one of his deepest regrets, calling it a failure of duty of care. He said he was so focused on capturing the horror of the real disaster that he lost sight of the real people suffering in front of him. The terror you see on screen during the sinking, the desperation in people's faces and movements, much of that wasn't acting. It was real cold, real suffering, real fear. Cameron got the authenticity he wanted, but the human cost was far higher than he ever intended. Number 12. Kate Winslet got pneumonia twice during filming. She spent so much time submerged in cold water that she developed pneumonia during production, recovered on antibiotics, and then got it again weeks later from continued exposure. She refused to wear a wetsuit under her costume because she believed it would compromise her movement and make her performance feel less authentic. She wanted to genuinely feel what Rose felt. The cold seeping into her bones, the weight of soaked fabric dragging her down, the pure exhaustion of staying afloat. In the scene where Rose searches for Jack through freezing water with an axe, Winslet was genuinely struggling. Her gasping breaths, her shaking body, the raw desperation in her voice, all of it was real. She later said she vowed never to work with Cameron again, calling him a perfectionist to the point of cruelty. Years later, she softened and reunited with him for Avatar, The Way of Water. But during Titanic, she was pushed to the absolute edge of what a human body can endure, and the performance we see on screen was born entirely from that suffering. Number 11. The famous line, "I'm the king of the world," was completely improvised. Cameron didn't write it. He told DiCaprio to climb to the bow of the ship, stand at the very front with the wind in his face, and do something, anything, that felt like pure joy and total freedom, like a young man with his whole life ahead of him and no idea what's coming. DiCaprio climbed up, threw his arms wide like wings, and shouted it completely off the top of his head. It was the first thing that came to him, a spontaneous expression of exactly the feeling Cameron wanted. Cameron loved it immediately and kept it without changing a single word. That moment became one of the most quoted lines in cinema history, referenced in everything from commercials to award speeches. It happened because DiCaprio was trusted to play freely and follow his instincts. It's a reminder that the best creative choices aren't always the result of careful planning. Sometimes they're discovered in the moment when an actor stops thinking and simply feels. Number 10. Rose's spit was actually James Cameron's spit. In the scene where Jack teaches Rose to spit like a man at the ship's railing, the close-up of spit hitting the deck didn't come from Kate Winslet. It came from Cameron himself, standing just off camera with a mouthful of water, waiting for the precise moment to release it at exactly the right angle. Winslet had attempted multiple takes but couldn't produce enough volume consistently on cue. So Cameron stepped in and handled it personally. It's a ridiculous and completely invisible detail that no audience member would ever notice. But it perfectly illustrates the level of control and obsession he brought to every single element of this film. Nothing was beneath his attention. Nothing was left to chance. Number 9. One of the dead bodies floating in the water was a real human corpse. During the sequence where Rose and Jack navigate through a sea of frozen bodies in the North Atlantic, one of those figures wasn't a prop or a mannequin. It was an actual cadaver provided by a medical school for anatomical accuracy. Cameron believed a real body would photograph differently than even the most convincing dummy. The way light interacts with skin, the way limbs naturally float, the subtle texture of a face in death, all of it registers differently on film. He believed audiences would sense that difference subconsciously even without being able to explain why. The crew was never told which body was real, adding an unspoken layer of dread and unease to the entire shoot. This detail only surfaced publicly years later when a crew member mentioned it in an interview. It remains one of the most controversial and ethically debated decisions Cameron made, a choice that placed authenticity above almost every other consideration. Number 8. The heart of the ocean was directly inspired by the Hope Diamond. While the necklace in the film is entirely fictional, it was modeled after one of history's most famous and supposedly cursed gemstones. The Hope Diamond is a massive blue diamond that passed through the hands of French royalty, Russian aristocrats, and wealthy socialites across centuries. Legend holds that everyone who owned it suffered serious misfortune. Marie Antoinette wore it before her execution. Other owners faced bankruptcy, madness, and untimely death. The diamond now sits in the Smithsonian behind thick glass, still carrying its dark reputation. Cameron borrowed this mythology of cursed glamour and doomed wealth to give the heart of the ocean meaning far beyond its monetary value. When Rose throws the necklace into the ocean at the film's end, she isn't simply discarding jewelry. She's releasing a past defined by tragedy, greed, and the crushing burden of surviving when so many others did not. That blue stone sinking into black water is Cameron saying that some things are simply too heavy to carry, no matter how beautiful they appear. Number 7. The movie has no opening credits. Titanic begins with James Horner's haunting score playing over underwater footage of the real wreck, robots drifting through the debris field, collapsed staircases covered in rust, and then moves directly into the story, without a single title card. No studio logo, no director's name, no stars listed. All credits appear at the very end. Cameron made this deliberate choice to pull audiences immediately into the world of the film, removing every barrier between viewer and story. He didn't want you thinking about actors or production companies. He wanted you thinking about the ship, the mystery, and the 1,500 lives lost in that wreckage. By the time you register that you haven't seen anyone's name on screen, you're already 40 minutes deep into the story, fully invested in Rose, completely hooked. The absence of credits becomes entirely invisible. You're just there, exactly where Cameron always intended you to be. Number 6. Leonardo DiCaprio wasn't the first choice for Jack Dawson. Matthew McConaughey, Chris O'Donnell, and even Tom Cruise were all seriously considered. Cameron initially wanted someone older, with more conventional leading man presence. But then DiCaprio came in and auditioned. He brought vulnerability, boyish charm, and an anarchic energy that made Jack feel less like a romantic archetype and far more like a real person you might actually encounter. Cameron watched the audition and realized he had been thinking about the character entirely wrong. Jack wasn't supposed to be larger than life. He was supposed to be genuinely accessible, exactly the kind of person a sheltered, wealthy girl would fall for, because he wasn't performing for anyone. Cameron later called casting DiCaprio one of the single best decisions he ever made. That performance turned DiCaprio into a global superstar overnight and cemented Jack Dawson as one of the most beloved characters in the entire history of cinema. Number 5. The film's most emotional line was written the night before shooting. When Rose clings to Jack's frozen body in the water and promises, "I'll never let go, Jack. I'll never let go." That line wasn't in the original script. Cameron wrote it the night before filming because he felt the moment needed a spoken promise to fully match its emotional weight. He brought it to set the following morning and handed it to Winslet right before the cameras rolled. She read it once, nodded, and delivered it on the very first take while floating in near-freezing water, her voice trembling with cold and genuine exhaustion. Cameron watched the playback and knew instantly he had exactly what he needed. He kept that first take without hesitation. The raw emotion you hear in that moment isn't the product of rehearsal or careful repetition. It's a woman on the physical edge of hypothermia delivering a line she had only just encountered for the very first time. Number 4. The Grand Staircase was a full-scale replica built from original blueprints, and it was destroyed in a single take. Cameron's production team spent months constructing an exact replica of the Titanic's iconic Grand Staircase, complete with hand-carved wood paneling, the ornate clock, the glass dome ceiling, and every detail down to the precise carpet pattern. The flooding scene where thousands of gallons of water obliterate this stunning space was filmed once, and once only. Once the set was destroyed, it was permanently gone. No backup existed, no second opportunity. The tension on set that day was absolutely suffocating. Cast and crew stood watching monitors in held silence. Cameron called action. The water came. The staircase shattered and collapsed in real time. When he called cut, the silence lasted several long seconds before the entire set erupted in applause. That sequence remains one of the most visually breathtaking and technically demanding scenes ever committed to film. Number 3. The photo of Jack at the end of the film is actually a photograph of James Cameron in his youth. In the final moments, the camera drifts slowly across Rose's bedside photos, documenting her long and fully lived life after the Titanic. There are images of her riding horses, flying planes, standing before monuments, every experience Jack encouraged her to pursue. One photo shows a young man on horseback meant to represent Jack. That young man is not Leonardo DiCaprio. It's Cameron himself, photographed during his younger years riding horses in Canada. He quietly inserted himself into Rose's life as a deeply personal Easter egg, a hidden signature placed exactly where only the most devoted viewers would eventually discover it. Most people assume it's stock footage or an unknown stand-in. It's actually the director writing himself permanently and invisibly into the story he gave everything to create. Number 2. Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio never had a romantic relationship off-screen. Despite their electric chemistry and decades of persistent rumors, both have consistently maintained they are close friends and nothing beyond that. In interviews across the years, they've described each other as platonic soulmates, bonded by the shared intensity and genuine hardship of making Titanic together. They went through something extreme on that set. They suffered side by side and supported each other through Cameron's relentless demands, emerging with a connection that doesn't fit neatly into any conventional category. That bond is completely visible on screen. The intimacy between Jack and Rose feels so genuine because the trust underneath it was entirely real. Their relationship stands as proof that great on-screen chemistry doesn't require off-screen romance. Sometimes real friendship creates something even deeper and far more enduring than anything romantic ever could. Number 1. There was actually enough room for Jack on that door. This is the detail fans have passionately argued about for nearly 3 decades. After the Titanic sinks and Rose climbs onto a floating piece of debris, Jack remains in the freezing water, holding the edge. He never tries to climb up. He holds her hand, tells her she will survive, makes her promise to live a full life, and then he freezes to death while she floats above him. The internet has produced debates, scientific papers, and full-scale physical experiments attempting to determine whether the door could have supported both their weights. In 2012, during the film's 3D re-release, Cameron finally addressed the question directly. He admitted the door probably could have supported both of them with careful positioning. But he explained that Jack's death was never about the physics of the door. It was always about his character. Jack spent every moment of the film ensuring Rose survived. His final act was simply the fullest expression of that. He didn't attempt to climb on because any attempt might have endangered her. It was never about available space. It was about sacrifice, about love made real through the willingness to let go. And that is precisely why that scene breaks hearts every single time it plays. So there you have it. 21 details hiding inside the most iconic romance ever filmed. From real corpses to improvised lines, from obsessively researched historical accuracy to personal directorial Easter eggs planted for fans willing to watch the film 100 times over, Titanic is a movie built on impossible ambition and truly relentless craft. Every frame carries intention. Every choice costs something. And now you will never watch it quite the same way again. If you loved this breakdown, the video on your screen dives into even more secrets from classic films you thought you already knew. Click it now and I'll see you in the next one.